Hi, this is Kumar. Welcome to the lab. Today we are going to take a look at some of the lab equipments so that when you do your first lab, you will understand what the equipment is called and how they are used. Mostly in the lab, you're going to use the glassware. Some of the glasswares are really confusing at the first time until you are used to some of the terminologies. And basically in the lab, you're going to use three glasswares, and those are beakers, flasks, and cylinders. Let's start with the most commonly used in the lab, that is the beaker. Beakers are used for holding various chemicals or liquids. You can see on the beakers there are some numbers, but they are not used for measuring precisely any liquid. And these beakers come in various sizes. You can see on this picture from bigger to the smaller, but the most commonly used beaker in the lab is the 250 milliliter. And if you look at this small, this is a 10 milliliter. This is really cute, isn't it? The next glassware looks like a cone, and the common name is a conical flask because if you look at this, it looks like a triangle. But the name is Erlenmeyer Flask, named after the scientist. And it's used approximately to measure the volume of the various liquids. It's useful for mixing by swirling because it has a narrow top and there are no chances of the liquid for splashing. Again, it comes in various sizes. Graduated cylinder. If you look at this glassware, it also comes in various sizes, but this is used for precisely measuring the volumes of the liquids. And how to read the level of the liquid, we are going to discuss that in the class, and you have to read it from the meniscus at the eye level. So what is a meniscus? We are going to discuss in that class. On some of the graduate cylinder, you will see a plastic ring. So this plastic ring is used as an indicator that how much liquid you want to measure. So you just put the plastic ring on this graduated cylinder and you pour the liquid inside till you want to top up at that level. Again, it comes in various sizes. The next one is the Florence Flask. So if you look at this, you can see a round bottom and a narrow top. So again, it's used for mixing chemicals, but basically it's also used for boiling the liquid. And in some cases, it's used to collect the gases if applicable. There are various sizes which comes in the Florence Flask. So the round ones are the Florence Flask, the conicals are the Erlenmeyer, and with the parallel lines are the Beakers. Reagent bottles. So when you're transferring any reagents like acid or bases, they comes in a big container. So you don't want to lift those big containers in the lab. So for that, your teacher is going to transfer those acids and bases in these reagent bottles, and you can take these to the lab stations and use them for mixing and in the test tube. So these are reagent bottles used for transporting acids and bases. What are acids and bases? We are going to discuss that in the class. Test tube. Another most commonly used glassware in lab is the test tube. So you must have seen in the movies in the chemistry lab these test tubes with their stands. It's used to hold chemicals, mixing chemicals, but it's not used for measuring any liquid precisely. Always remember, when you're mixing chemicals, there will be some fumes coming out and you're using the test tube at the hand's distance, and you don't want to smell those vapors coming out of the chemical mixing. So always remember, when you want to smell it, you have to waft. And keep away the test tube from the faces of yourself and your partner. These again come in various sizes. To hold these test tube, you can see the test tube holders, which are you don't heat these test tube holding in the hand. For that, you use these test tube holders. Rubber stoppers. So to close these various glassware, you use these rubber stoppers like test tubes or Florence Flask or Erlenmeyer Flask. So to put on the top, you use these rubber stoppers. And the holes allow the insertion of the glass tubing, probing or thermometer needed for the experiment. So you can see some of the holes in there. So these are used for inserting thermometers to check the temperature of the liquid. Distillation flasks, these you won't be using much, but just to make sure that when you look at these guys, you know what these are. So these are the distillation flask and used to separate liquid based on the boiling point. So when you're boiling two different liquids with just separate boiling point, like when you're using water or alcohol to separate, you use this distillation flask. So you can see a nozzle. So when you're heating these two different liquids, due to their boiling point, the first liquid with the lower boiling point is going to evaporate and come out from this nozzle, and you can collect in some test tube or some flask. So you won't be using these guys much, but just for your information. Buret and the Buret clamp. These tall guys are used for precisely measuring the dispensed liquids. So these are attached to some of the stands with the ring stands, and you can see this is a Buret clamp which holds the Buret to the ring stand. So when you're using a Buret, you're using a stand with a Buret clamp, and you clasp the Buret to these Buret clamps. So these are used precisely for measuring various dispensed liquids. So when I say in the lab that you will be using 10 milliliter of water to mix it with a chemical or in any experiment, you use these Buret, and we'll see how to use these. You can see a little stopper over there. So you open it, and precisely the water or whatever you're using to measure, it's going to go down. So you look for the markers and you measure the liquid precisely in there. So I'll be discussing more about that in the class. Ring stand or ring clamps. These tall guys are the ring stands, which holds the glassware with the ring clamps, and you can put some wire gauze. We'll see to that what's a wire gauze is, and put a beaker on that, and you can use some burners at the bottom to heat or evaporate. Test tube brushes. When you're using the test tubes in the lab with various chemicals, there's a possibility some of the chemicals are going to sit at the bottom, and you want to clean them. So these are the brushes used to clean the test tube, because whenever you're done with your lab, don't keep all those things like that. You need to clean them. So if you see something stuck at the bottom of the test tube, you're going to use these test tube brushes for that. Test tube holder, we have already discussed that. These are used for carrying or holding hot test tubes. When you're heating any test tube, you don't have to hold it in hand and heat it. So these guys are used for carrying the test tube and heating the test tube. Thermometers. These are used for measuring temperature, and maybe a possibility they are in Fahrenheit or centigrades. But when you're using thermometer, you have to be very careful because at the bottom there is a mercury and you don't want to break it. Hot plates. Looking at the hot plate, which are in our lab, it doesn't look like that because they are more of a yellow color. But these are used for heating substances, and I have already discussed the safety measure because you don't have to touch these plates when you are in a lab, because these do not even seem hot, but they may be really hot. So there are no indicator on the hot plates to tell whether they are hot or not, and you don't want to get burned by touching them. So safety measure at the first when you're in the lab. Wire mesh or the gauze, they are used to absorb and spread the heat of the flame. So when you're heating any beaker or flask, you use these wire meshes because these spread the heat flame, and you are going to heat the liquid evenly when you're using these. And these keeps the glassware from cracking and breaking because you're not directly heating the glassware. So you're going to use that as a part of a ring stand. You can keep on the ring stand these wire gauges. Clay triangles. These are used to hold a crucible in place on a ring stand and also help to absorb the spread heat of a flame and part of ring stand. You can also use when you're heating evaporating dish. So any substance used for crucible or for evaporating dish for heating that. So crucible, what are crucible? These are used for heating substances because they are made up of porcelain and they can withstand high direct heat. So if you're heating something at a really high temperature, you're going to use this crucible and you're going to cover it. Crucible tongs, as those crucible are going to be really hot, you're not going to handle with your bare hands. So you use these guys to hold those crucibles when they're hot. So remember, when you're holding these crucibles, you have to be really careful. Beaker tongs. So when you're transferring any liquid and the beaker is really hot, you use the beaker tong, and one of the main thing you need to take care of is that don't put real hard pressure because you're going to break the beaker. If you're holding it really too tight, it's going to put more pressure on that and you're going to break that. So that's one of the precautions you're going to take when you're using the beaker tongs. Mortar and pestle, these are used to grind substances into powder. There will be a lab in which you'll be using these to crush some of the tablets. So they're used to grind the substance into powder and smaller particles. Scoopula. They are, you can say, between a spoon and a scapula, they are scoopula. So they are used to scoop the chemical powders from the container. Again, these are not the measuring instruments, and some of them, they don't have a handle, because in this picture you can see there's a handle on the scoopula, but in our labs there are no handles. So it's just the body with that. Stirring rods, as the name suggests, they are used for stirring substances. Why we are using these guys? Because they are made of glass and there is no reaction when you're using a stirring rod to mix some of the chemicals. And you have to clean these rods because you don't want some chemicals to be stick, and then you're gonna stir some other chemicals and there will be some reactions. So I'm telling you some of the precautions to use these glasswares, so you have to keep that